So right now we're in the time of year when we have a lot of fish that are transitioning from spawn to post-spawn. We still have some pre-spawn fish depending on where you're at in the country. And everybody knows when those fish get shallow, it can be one of the most absolute fire times of the year to catch a lot of fish and catch big fish. Now, depending on where you're at in the country, you still have post-spawn fish or you have pre-spawn fish. I don't care where you're at right now. And so one of the best baits that I want to talk about is one of the best baits for when fish get shallow to find fish, cover a lot of water, and potentially catch some big fish. And that bait is going to be a floating worm. So for those of you guys that are kind of new to bass fishing, a floating worm looks like the dumbest thing that a fish could possibly eat, right? I mean, I have bubblegum, and this red translucent color is called Methiolate. And again, it looks like the stupidest thing you could possibly throw. But what this bait does is it triggers fish, similar to how a fluke triggers fish. And what you get is you get these really, really bright colors that stand out, that really catch those fish's attention. It's almost like when somebody walks into the room wearing a bright red dress or a bright pink dress. No matter what you're doing, it kind of catches your eye and makes you go, damn, like why is that chick or why is that guy wearing, or why is so-and-so wearing that? And the fish do the exact same thing, because a lot of times, whether it's pre-spawn, spawn, or post-spawn, you get those fish that kind of get in the zone on what they're doing, right? They're up there shallow for a reason. And so sometimes you have to pull their attention away. And what brighter colors do is it really grabs their attention. And that's why these bright colors do such a good job at catching those fish's attention. It stands out against everything else in the background. Everything else that they're doing makes them stop, look at it. And then with these, so this is a zoom trick worm. You can pretty much use any worm you want, but this is the originator of the Methiolate worm. What you get is you get a fluke-like action. And a bright fluke will do the same thing, but this worm has a different fall, and you can see how that worm is just so nimble and so wiggly, for a lack of a better term, right? And what you get when you move your rod tip with this bait is it zooms through the water, and it really causes a reaction strike similar to how a jerk bait would do. So you get this super bright color that really grabs those fish's attention, and the action that really brings them in and seals the deal on it. Where this bait really shines is right now, especially in the post spawn, is when I really, really like this bait, because you still have a lot of fish up shallow, and what they're doing is they're kind of cruising, trying to feed back up, and they're kind of feeding on a little bit of everything, and especially you guys that are down south that get more of a shad spawn. That's when those fish are really staying shallow. Bluegill spawn, those fish are staying shallow, so you have to try to trigger their attention. And where this bait really shines is around shallow cover. So I'm talking flooded bushes, I'm talking buckbrush, I'm talking laydowns, anything that has cover that those fish can really get around and kind of position themselves back up in. That's where it's going to be ideal, where those fish can really stay there and find a comfortable house that they can just hang out in. That's where I'm really going to like to throw this, because those fish are already up there, they're sitting there, and you know there's a population of fish that live up there. I don't really throw this too much just going down a do-nothing bank. You can, and you'll catch fish, but those fish get depleted so fast. And so where this bait really shines is if you're pre-fishing for a tournament and you're trying to find fish, maybe day one of a tournament, or for you guys that are out there fun fishing for a day. That's where this bait really shines, because what happens is these fish are really, really aggressive, but that means they'll eat a little bit of everything going through there. I think this does the best job at catching them, or a really, really good job at catching them. It can be a really fun bite because you get to see the bite. But what happens is those fish get depleted pretty fast. So this is going to be great for you guys that have one-day tournaments. You're pre-fishing for a tournament and trying to find where the fish are at, because this is a great way to cover water. You can go down the bank, twitching it, covering a ton of water, and you're going to get some incredible bites, and it's really going to key you in on where those fish are at. So let's kind of talk about what I'm looking for when I throw this and the gear that I'm going to throw this on. Now, one thing that people don't think about is these worms skip extremely well. All I'm going to do is I'm going to Texas rig it with an EWG hook or your favorite offset worm hook, and what that's going to do is that's going to give it a little bit of weight to help it sink. And I like to fish it on the same setup that I would use for a wacky rig. I like either a 6/8 or a 7/1 medium fast action spinning rod for the most part, because these are pretty light. They don't, you can't really skip them the greatest on a bait caster. You still can if you're going to go down the bank, a do-nothing bank, and throw it. That's when I'll put it on a bait caster where I really can lay the wood to those fish when I don't have to worry about anything. But when I'm really getting around some target-oriented stuff, that's when I like that spinning rod, because I can just get so much more control and skip it so much better and really get just a more accurate presentation with this bait. And so I like that arc essence in that 6/8 to a 7/1 medium fast action. And as always, guys, I'll have all of this stuff linked down below. As always, I'll have the hooks, rod, line, everything down below, baits, etc. So you guys won't have to go hunt for that. But what that's going to do is this bait skips so well back up under cover. That's why it shines so well in that cover, because people get going down the bank and they want to throw chatterbaits, spinner baits, top waters, and it's hard to get that kind of stuff up into cover unless you really know what you're doing, right? So unless you're going behind a really experienced angler, you can use this bait to go behind people, get that bait up under cover, and get those reaction strikes that really draw those fish out of there. Because it kind of does the same thing that a bigger swim bait would do with this bright color that stands out and that jerkbait-like action. You can skip it way up into that cover and twitch it out, and you'll get to lure those fish out of that cover. As they see that bright color coming by, it'll just pop in their eyes and they'll come up and grab that. So that's where I really like it. And the line that I'm going to throw that on is I like a braid to a fluorocarbon leader like we do everything else. And if you're trying to get a slower presentation, if you really have to slow it down, I'll go braid to a monofilament leader. That monofilament can be really key if those fish really want a lot of hang time in there, because that mono floats, and so it'll help float that bait up in there. Most of the time I'm working it fast enough that that monofilament, that 10-12 feet of monofilament really doesn't make that big of a deal, because you're skipping it up in a couple feet of water and twitching it out. It's not really a deal breaker. I know some guys like to throw it on straight mono, but I prefer braid to a fluorocarbon leader when I'm throwing it on that spinning rod. If you're throwing it on a bait casting rod and you find yourself breaking fish off, maybe then go to a monofilament, just like you would with a topwater, because that'll allow you to skip it. That thicker monofilament will float a little bit better, and it'll have a little bit more stretch for cushion in that hook set. That's going to be key if you're breaking fish off. I know I talked to my buddy Scott Isaacs down at the last Open on Kerr, and he was breaking fish off, so he switched to monofilament, and that's how he was able to catch some key fish for him. But again, that braid to a fluorocarbon leader, I like P-Line Spin X braid, because it stands out, it's super bright, so I can see all those really light bites. When your line's laying on the water, you can see it turn, you can see it jolt forward, and that really keys me in. If I skip it back up into cover and I can't see my bait and I can't see what's going on, I can watch my line, and that'll really stand out for me. I like that in a 12 to a 10 pound though, that braid. And then the leader, I like 10 to 15 pound P-Line tactical fluorocarbon. And what that's going to do is that's going to sink it just a little bit, because we want that bait to be a little bit under the water, right? I don't like it floating on top. I just like it a little bit under the water, so I get more of a reaction out of that bait. I can make it move and hunt a little bit better, as opposed to if it was floating on top, it kind of skips, and we've all had that happen. And I don't really like to put a swivel on there, because that can kind of get caught up in the guides when you're trying to skip it, and it can also get caught up in the cover when I'm skipping it around that cover. So I just like that 10 to 15 or that 12 to 15 pound fluorocarbon leader to really get that bait under the water a little bit, and also that a little bit of abrasion resistance with that heavier line, so that way if they do get kind of caught up in that cover, I can pull them out of it really easily. Now, the hooks that I like to throw this on, and this is kind of important, is I like the Trocar EWG hooks. And the main reason that I like the Trocar EWG hooks is they have a bigger barb on them and more of a laser point on them. They have kind of a blade point, and so it penetrates easier, so I don't have to put as much pressure. And with that bigger barb, you really have to fight to get that hook out of them. Once you get them hooked, you can almost bet the house they're coming to the boat unless they break off. But that bigger barb, what that allows me to do when I skip it up in there, if I get a bite and I hook it and it gets caught in that cover and I have to open my bail to get up in there to get it off, I know that hook's not coming out. I know no matter how much that fish jumps, no matter what that fish does, it's not coming off. And that saved me a few times. Those Trocar, man, that barb really has saved my butt a few times, and it's really key for me. Real quick, if you guys haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button to follow along with the content I have coming out every Tuesday. But let's start talking about floating worm. So the areas that I like to throw this, and this is really important, because what happens when those fish are post-spawn, they start transitioning back out of those pockets that they were up in when they were spawning. I like to get more on the secondary points, the secondary pockets, or those main lake pockets and main lake banks that have the most flooded water on those bushes, the grass, etc. Because as those fish are sliding back out, that's where I'm trying to catch them. This also works good around shallow docks, anything that is closer to the main main lake because I'm trying to follow those fish as they start to transition back out. It does really, really good around those transition areas. You know, if you can find any of those pinch points that still have a lot of brush in the water, a lot of flooded cover, that's where I'm really going to target this. But the more main lake, the better, because that's where you're going to have fish coming to you as they're transitioning back out of those pockets in that shallower water, and they're trying to get back out into their summer haunts. That's where I really like to target chasing those fish down with this Methiolate floating worm. So another one of my favorite shallow water baits, just like this Methiolate floating worm, is a swim jig. It's also a great way to cover water, great way to get big bites, and I'm going to have everything linked in this video up here where I break everything down, and I've done really, really well and made a lot of money so far this year on a swim jig, and I think it's going to be a video you don't want to miss. But thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video, and God bless.